Hello, this is Professor JPS, and this is part two for Communication Arts 250, Communication Arts 257, American Film Heritage. And I'm going to discuss the film MASH now and remind the students that we're talking about the motion picture MASH, not the long-running television show MASH that was on after the success of the film. This particular film is an interesting movie. In some ways, it's very evocative for the time period. Again, this is 50 years ago, which is incredible to me that it was that long ago. At any rate, I was just a child when it came out. I was 6 years old. At any rate, the film takes place in 1949, 1950, but is really about the 1960s. Similarly to Bonnie and Clyde, how Bonnie and Clyde was set in the past, but brought 1960s ideas and sensibilities to the characters of the 1930s. The same idea is utilized for this particular film. This film, even though it's about the Korean War, which I'm not so sure the younger students have a sense of what that war was about. It was between World War II and prior to Vietnam. Again, it was fighting North Korean communists, and it was a kind of a stalemate after about a little less than 2 years, 1949 through about 1951. But nonetheless, the film takes place in 1970, and it's about 1950 or so. And the characters in the film are just kind of 60s characters, really. I mean, they don't, the movie maker, Robert Altman, is not really interested in a kind of necessarily a feeling of demonstrating a kind of historical portrayal of the Korean War. The movie is similar to both Dr. Strangelove in that it's making fun of people in power, people who are in power of the military, and it's making fun of institutions of American life. During the it's just using the Korean War as its vehicle to make that case. The movie is directed by a guy called Robert Altman. And Robert Altman is no longer with us, but he was a very, very good movie maker who did a lot of wonderful films in the 1970s, 60s, and 1970s. He also did make some film in the 80s and 90s, but he kind of was a late bloomer. He was from Kansas City, and he was interested in art and interested in music, and was also what was called an industrial filmmaker, making commercial films for industry, for factories and warehouses and corporations and companies. And he made his way into Hollywood in the 60s, early 1960s, working for television, particularly war television programs, some westerns, and worked his way up to become a director. And MASH was his first real big hit. It was a film made in 1970, as I said. And the reading that you have from MASH, which looks like this, the reading that you have from MASH is filled with what are called program notes that will help you, I think, get a better sense of understanding the film. The film in some ways is, it's not PC in any way. Part of the reason I still show it is to discuss this idea of how the film may age well or not so well, depending upon the audience member. But the film has certainly a good deal of sexism in it, some mild racism in it, even though some of the jokes are about racism, and a kind of bullying sensibility between the two lead characters played by Donald Sutherland and Elliot Gould. Elliot Gould, you younger people will probably know as Rachel and Ross's father on Friends, but he was a fairly decent-sized star in the latter 60s and early 70s. Some of the things I want to discuss in terms of the film MASH that I want you to look for is the mise en scène, or elements of filmmaking in the film that help give the film its particular visual look. This is all in the notes too. I'll just say it quickly. to not waste time, but also you can look at it in your reading. And if you don't have the readings, if you ask, I have all the readings here at my house. Some students have come by and picked them up. We can certainly do that. Altman uses Panavision cameras, which are very, very known for their width. Yet he utilizes telephoto lenses in which the foreground and background planes collapse onto the midground plane. And this gives the film a kind of fuzzy look to it. The combination actually makes the film feel claustrophobic, like the characters are trapped in their environment and in their circumstance, and also drained of any real visual brightness or color. The overall effect, as I say here, is a kind of drab realism. Okay. Robert Altman also uses something that I think students in the past handful of years have found this kind of annoying, but it was fairly revolutionary for the time. He used something called overlapping dialogue. And he does it all through his career. And he does this to kind of differ from the overall staged look of most Hollywood films. Most Hollywood films up to that time had no one interrupting each other, as if people spoke in a way that was non-interruptive and as if to reflect real conversations. So there's lots of... The music in the film is used completely ironically, completely. All the music is kind of a joke to an older, more patriotic war films made in the 40s and 1950s that were much more celebratory of the United States and the Allied powers winning World War II. The audience in 1970 knew that this kind of rah-rah music was not being played to them straightforwardly, but as a cunning joke. As the film continues to make fun of the institution, the film is using music very, very what's called tongue-in-cheek, or ironically, most of the time. It's I think you'll get a sense of that when you see the film. Robert Altman is also someone who uses what's called ensemble acting all of the time. There are a couple of protagonists in the film, but many, many characters that he kind of just lets weave in and out of the dialogue, weave in and out of messy, realistic look to it. Okay. And also, like American Graffiti, this film has it's not one strong narrative that's going from point A to point B to point C. It's a series of misadventures, you might say, that are kind of funny, kind of dopey, kind of serious, but also always anti-establishment, anti-authority. Much of the acting of the film is improvised, which means that, yeah, the actors themselves went off script to try to be as funny as possible or as spontaneous as possible to give the film a kind of lift, to give it a kind of sense of camaraderie and fun. The film is the key contextual point is the film, although it is set in Korea, it is really making a comment on the Vietnam War, which was then raging. Audiences in 1970 were ready to have the establishment military satirized. Even though the jokes are technically placed within the setting of the 1940s/50, the film's tone evokes a 1960s feel. For example, the two lead characters are not really playing period. I mean, one guy has a Fu Manchu mustache. That would never happen in 1950s military. By that I mean they're not made to look like a soldier of the 1940s or 1950s realistically, but of the contemporary 1960s/1970 era, because the film is very farcical. It's trying to make fun of the military, and it was a huge because audiences identified with this anti-war theme, like we've seen in both Dr. Strangelove and in Bonnie and Clyde. Okay. Now that's part 2, discussing MASH. Again, the film, not the television show. It is available on Amazon, but it's also available on Hulu if you have Hulu for free. Okay, and maybe there's another way you can find it. I don't know. That's part 2 for COM 257, March 23rd, 2020.